You know that feeling when you wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep, when you push through your day running on empty, wondering where your energy went? Here's something most people don't know, that fatigue may actually be happening inside your cells. That's why I've been using Anti-Factor Lipids powder from Nutritional Therapeutics for years. I don't go a day without it. It's based on over 20 years of research and a patented process called membrane lipid replacement, which actually repairs the damaged components of your cell membranes, restoring your cell's ability to produce energy the way they did when you were younger. Clinical studies show Anti-Factor can reduce fatigue by up to 40%. Just 1 or 2 scoops a day. Mix it in a smoothie like I do, sprinkle it on food, and you're giving your body the science of youthful energy. Anti-Factor Lipids powder comes in 2 convenient sizes. For more information and to order, just call 800-982-9158, 800-982-9158, or go to antifactor.com. That's antifactor.com for Anti-Factor Lipids powder. Welcome back to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. We're talking to Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, author of Making the Cut, How to Heal Modern Medicine. In the past, he's criticized the censorship industrial complex. In part 1, we talked about his participation in cases that try to push back against censorship and government efforts to throttle down what's called misinformation. Depends on, it's in the eye of the beholder. Dr. Kheriaty is a bioethicist, and he is involved in issues related to assisted suicide and organ transplantation. But also in his book, he's criticized modern medicine for its loss of heart. Physicians are now redubbed providers. Patients are now considered clients. So what does that do to the doctor-patient relationship?
So I argue in the book that at the center of medicine is something that always has been there and that will never change. So what is central to medicine is not a new technology or a set of techniques. What's central to medicine is a relationship of a particular kind, the doctor-patient relationship, the relationship between someone who is made vulnerable by illness. Illness is a universal phenomenon that can strike anyone. It's the great equalizer, right? Rich, poor, powerful, wealthy, whatever. Illness makes us vulnerable and leads us, against our preference, typically, to enter into a relationship that requires trust with someone who professes to use all their knowledge and skills only for the purpose of healing. And so unpacking what that means is a central theme of my book, Making the Cut. But I also take a look at the contemporary healthcare system. And what I notice, just to sort of boil down a very complicated story into maybe the simplest terms, is that medicine has grown into a sort of top-down industrialized system where people, let's say walking into a clinic or walking into a hospital, feel like they're being processed by an impersonal set of bureaucratic machinery. I call it turnstile medicine, right? You go through a bunch of turnstiles like you do at Disneyland. Disneyland is exquisitely designed by engineers to move people through the system, right? As many rides, as many lines, as many food lines, as many bathroom breaks as you can in the course of a day.
There's also a money extraction system as well.
Yeah, exactly. Take as much of your money as they can along the way. Well, modern medicine is designed with much the same people moving machinery and money taking machinery as possible. And so people feel processed by the system but not necessarily healed by the system, right? So you're finally in the office with the actual physician, and he's staring at a computer screen rather than looking at you, laying hands on you, examining you carefully, listening carefully to your chief complaint and the history of your present illness. Instead, he's asking a bunch of questions that feel like they have very little to do with the reason you came in and what you wanted to talk to him about in the first place, checking a bunch of boxes that seem sort of extraneous to your complaint or your concern. And those things are being dictated by external forces that have little to do with actually your health and healing. Physicians have become glorified data entry clerks, right? We were promised, for example, the electronic health medical record was going to make things so much more efficient and allow us to share information with other providers. And in fact, it's just sucked up more and more of our time to the point where
we become subservient
to it rather than it serving the needs of the patient and the physician who's trying to help the patient. And so what I argue, and I draw on the work of Ivan Illich and others, is that when medicine grows to a certain industrialized scale and scope, it can't help but harming people. Medicine isn't harming people because all the people within the healthcare industry are sort of nefarious and greedy. Some of them are, right? Some of them don't care. But many of them, let me tell you, many of them do care deeply. And they're also deeply frustrated, feeling like I'm just the doctor, the nurse, feeling like I'm just a widget in this machinery over which I have little control, and that's detracting from my ability to tailor care to the individual needs of the patient. And this is why, sort of going back to something I said toward the beginning of our conversation, if that's the diagnosis, what is the treatment plan? I think if the system has evolved such that it's too top heavy, the top down control, it's too centralized, it's too homogenous, everyone gets the same thing, right? Your labs dictate that we have to put you on a statin, right? Because everyone whose triglycerides or whose cholesterol is above a certain threshold is going to get this intervention, right? Rather than working with the patient to figure out what's going to be best for them individually. If you're working within a system that makes it hard not to practice in that way, then you've got to get out of that system, right? Which is hard to do. It's hard to know how to do that. I actually draw on a strange source as a proposal moving forward, and maybe a rather stark analogy. But I actually look to
homeschooling.
Well, homeschooling was part of the analogy, but even before I get into homeschooling, I do argue we need the equivalent of a homeschooling movement in medicine. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a helpful analogy. But I also draw on the work of the Czech dissidents that were opposing the communist regime in their country in the 1970s.
Velvet Revolution.
Right, exactly. Which again, it's like, oh my gosh, is medicine like, Soviet communism? Well, okay, maybe it's a strong analogy, but essentially what they said was the institutions of civil society under this regime have been so corrupted by the ideology of the regime that it's really hard to reform them from within, whether it's healthcare, education, the financial system, communications. We need what they call a parallel polis. We need to develop our own small scale grassroots institutions that serve some of these same functions. And they said the regime is big and powerful enough that if it targeted any one or another of these initiatives for elimination, it could destroy them. So the tactic is basically you develop so many of these things that it's like whack-a-mole for the regime. They can crush some of them, but they can't crush all of them because there's just too many, right? It's just too hard to keep up. And eventually, if those prove viable and they thrive, they will circle back and influence the mainstream, in that case, actually undermining the ideology of the regime to the point where it falls in 1989. So yeah, I argue that we need a parallel polis within medicine. And I give a few examples of, examples of direct primary care, which is an attempt to eliminate some of the middleman sort of third-party payers, to a direct subscription-based payment system for healthcare, and allow doctors to work within a system where, their recommendations are not being dictated by as many external forces. If you take just to get a sense of where the mainstream system is at today, if you take all the people in healthcare who have some face-to-face contact with patients, doctors, nurses, x-ray techs, your front office staff, whatever, you add up the number of those people. Then you take all the people within healthcare that never have a face-to-face encounter with a patient. right? They're just bean counters. They're just bureaucrats. And again, I'm not trying to disparage all of those people. Some of them have useful and necessary functions. But that category of people who never have face-to-face contact with patients is now larger. There's more of those people than there are doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, whatever. I think a system that is metastasized in that way is wasteful, and it's also not helping people ultimately. And I think people feel that. And actually, our public health outcomes strongly suggest that. We have a chronic disease epidemic, which can't be laid at the feet of medicine entirely. There's problems with our food supply. There's problems with environmental toxins. There are things that physicians
societal problems as well.
Societal problems, things that physicians admittedly have little control over, right? But medicine itself seems pretty powerless to address the chronic disease epidemic in society. The fact that we're spending twice as much on healthcare and barely breaking the top 50 in terms of health outcomes is a pretty strong indictment on the current system, which suggests, I think, that the system needs a pretty radical overhaul. So to go back to the homeschooling analogy, I think we are in medicine today where the homeschooling movement was in the 1970s. There are a few people that are opting out, that are trying new things. Your podcast is probably a good example of that, and your listeners probably are aware of some of the things that are being tried now to try to change the way in which we approach health and healing, and integrate things that have been perhaps abandoned or lost to practice in a holistic way and so forth. Those initiatives are sort of like the intrepid homeschoolers of the 1970s who had to tell their children, don't tell anyone that you're being homeschooled, because they'll call social services and come and arrest mom and dad for doing this. But, some brave pioneers basically decided we can educate ourselves better than the mainstream system. We can educate our children better than the mainstream system can. And we're going to do it. And they did it well enough that, after a few decades, those kids started winning the spelling bees and acing the standardized exams and getting into good colleges and proving that it could work. Not every experiment in homeschooling did work. Some of them failed. Some of the people who tried it were not prepared for what it would entail. But in many cases, it did work. And now, especially following the lockdowns and the school closures during COVID, homeschooling is every bit as mainstream as private school. Right. And it has circled back and influenced mainstream education in the form of the charter school movement and so forth. And so I think it's going to take a couple of decades for medicine to get there. And I think the new initiatives that we're starting to see grow up are, the first kind of adventurous forays into, hey, let's opt out of this system and strike out on our own and see what we can accomplish. And I applaud those initiatives, not because all of them, each and every one, is going to work, but because this is the kind of spirit that we need in order to recover, what's central to medicine, which is that doctor-patient relationship, that tailoring of care to the individual needs of the patient, a Hippocratic paradigm that uses drugs judiciously, surgery even more judiciously, that looks at environment, that looks at diet, exercise, lifestyle factors first, and doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but also doesn't make the latest and greatest, newest technology the centerpiece of everything that it's doing.
Okay, folks, at this point, let's pause and allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to share an important message with you. So here goes. Listen up.
Have you ever heard someone say that probiotics didn't work for them? Since all probiotics are not the same, the probiotic you choose can make the difference between superior results and no results. Look for an enriched formula containing these 3 key components for best results: probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. A worldwide leader in microbiome health for over 40 years, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics is an enriched full-spectrum probiotic system fermenting multiple strains of probiotic bacteria and nourishing prebiotics. The result? Transformative postbiotic metabolites that maintain and support the biodiversity of flora in your gut for optimal digestion, gut-brain, and immune health. Dr. Ohhira's, certified vegetarian, free of gluten, allergens, dairy, and GMOs. For a superior probiotic formula, get Dr. Ohhira's probiotics today at Sprouts, Natural Grocers, and other natural health retailers nationwide.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting our sponsors. And now back to today's guest, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, author of Making the Cut. You address the issue of the what we can call the mechanization of medicine, because with AI, we now have the opportunity, because we have a shortage of doctors and healthcare practitioners, to issue guidelines and create algorithms and, in effect, guide less experienced practitioners, maybe less gifted practitioners, to push the right buttons and administer the right care. There's evidence-based medicine, which sounds great. I mean, who wants to go to a doctor who's not practicing evidence-based medicine?
Right.
But there's actually some strong criticisms of what's called evidence-based medicine. Yeah. Can you explain?
Yeah, let's start with guidelines, and then I'll talk about evidence-based medicine. Guidelines is a very slippery term. We've had a proliferation of guidelines over the last several decades. I have the numbers in my book. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but a few decades ago, from professional societies, public health agencies, there were a couple of hundred medical guidelines. Now that number is in the thousands, right? And these guidelines are not if they were only guidelines, that would not be very problematic. But guidelines is actually a euphemism, because in many cases, they are cookbooks that physicians are required to follow, and if they don't, then they are penalized when it comes to reimbursement. So once payment is tied to these guidelines, they're no longer guidelines, right? They're one-size-fits-all, algorithmic-based recipe medicine that can only be bad medicine, because every patient is different, right? And research studies are based on population averages, right? But your patients may not be right in the middle of that bell curve. They may be more on the tail end of the bell curve. They may be one standard deviation away from the mean on the bell curve. They may need something different, a different dose, a different approach, different intervention than what the population average as a whole in this study happened to show. And if you can't practice medicine in that way, you're not really a physician. You're just a robot. Evidence-based medicine is another very slippery term because it was invented basically by people who were pushing for the only interventions you're allowed to use are those based on randomized clinical trials. But randomized clinical trials are so expensive that they can only be done, and they only are done today, by and large, by pharmaceutical companies for their newest products that have a long patent shelf life on them, right? So we're not doing good randomized clinical trials of generic or repurposed drugs to see if they may have other applications. We're not doing randomized clinical trials of nutrition or nutraceutical-based interventions because it's too expensive, and they are not sufficiently profitable because they're not patentable, right? So what that view of evidence-based medicine essentially does is privilege not just pharmaceuticals, but the most expensive pharmaceuticals, right? And so rather than saying we need to practice evidence-based medicine based on quote unquote the best, and then assuming that randomized clinical trials are always the best, we need to go based on all available evidence, right? Because there's many forms of evidence in the research literature. And for certain questions, actually, randomized controlled trials are not the best way to answer those questions. The research enterprise is very complex. The kinds of questions, the kinds of information that you can glean from various trials is complicated. And so there's no such thing as one type of perfect study. So yes, evidence-based medicine, if by that you mean we use all available evidence, we always try to gather relevant evidence to answer important questions, but no to evidence-based medicine if it privileges only the kind of study that can be conducted or that is being conducted today by people who have a vested financial interest in selling a particular product.
So finally, I'll ask you, and this is a tough question to ask, is, how is it that you maintain a position on the faculty of a major medical school? How is it that they allow you to poison the minds of future doctors with such heretical ideas?
Well, it worked for 16 years before they caught up to me. And it admittedly it became tougher at the university over the last 10 years, I would say. When I first joined the faculty, I did my residency there. So I was at UCI from 2003 to 2007 doing my psych residency. And then I would say 2007 to roughly 2015 to 2017, I had a lot of freedom, right? I didn't have to think a lot about medical freedom because it was just a climate in which a lot more medical freedom existed. But something shifted over the last maybe 8 years of my time there that crept up on you slowly, and but by the end, I was really feeling it, and I think that slow erosion of the ability to practice medicine well, the ability to teach without getting pushback, principles that I regarded as central to medicine and medical ethics, that became more and more difficult. And it, perhaps unconsciously motivated my decision to finally, reach the tipping point where I said, all right, enough is enough. This vaccine mandate policy is just one step too far. It wasn't the first thing the university had done that I had, strong disagreements with. But I think for me, it was a kind of tipping point. And, at that point, things came to a head. And I think the university recognized that, okay, here's our chance to get rid of a full professor, which, can be hard.
It's hard.
Can be hard to do, but they could do it based on alleged non-compliance with the very policy that I was challenging because I didn't take the COVID shot. I had already had COVID, had natural immunity, and that was the basis for my legal argument in the case that my form of immunity was being unjustly discriminated against, even though it was as good, indeed superior to vaccine-induced immunity. And so, I think that was a pretense that they fired me for alleged non-compliance with that policy because they did accommodate other faculty members to work remotely and so forth. They didn't make those kinds of accommodations for me. I think it was retaliatory, but I think I survived as long as I could in an institution like that, and hopefully did some good for the students while I was there, maybe providing a little different perspective than what they were used to. And I do miss teaching the residents and medical students. I've been able to replicate everything else that I was doing at the university. I have a private practice where I see patients. Mm-hmm. I'm doing my research and my writing. I'm having conversations like this and, trying to educate the public on these issues. But the one thing that's hard to replicate is working with
directly with students
and residents. So I miss that aspect of the old job, but I have a lot of freedom now. And so I can speak my mind on these issues without fear of retaliation or running afoul of the powers that be at the university. And so that's been quite liberating, actually. And I'm happy now. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else.
Right, given the current academic climate. So congratulations to you. And also, I have to say, kudos to you for your courage in really standing up for important values that I think that could really make a difference if they were incorporated in our current medical system. The book is Making the Cut: How to Heal Modern Medicine. By the way, a great read because it's a fun read because the anecdotes in there are really, really, it's a little bit like reading the script of the series The Pit. There's a lot of, interesting and amusing anecdotes about what it's like to undergo medical training with the underlying message that we need to put the heart back into medicine. That's, I think, the central theme of the book. So congratulations to you, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty. Thanks very much for joining us. Really, really, really appreciate the time that you shared with us.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Indeed. All the best. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and this is the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I want to thank you for listening to the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded every weekday. And please give us a rating and review. It truly helps new people discover intelligent medicine. The Intelligent Medicine Podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, please visit drhoffman.com and discover everything Intelligent Medicine has to offer, including frequently updated, unbiased health news and fully vetted product and supplement recommendations. You're listening to Intelligent Medicine, a resource to help you take control of your health. We offer a balanced, objective analysis of all your health, wellness, and aging options, both conventional and alternative. Now you can take your engagement to the next level by joining FullScript. FullScript is my online dispensing platform that only offers curated, professional-grade supplement brands that I know and trust. Never counterfeit or expired, always stored and shipped correctly. Just go to drhoffmanstore.com for more information and to start your free FullScript account. Buying through FullScript offers fast, free shipping, optional refill reminders, a mobile-friendly site. It's safe, secure, and HIPAA compliant and offers world-class support. Just go to drhoffmanstore.com. You'll get access to the supplements and features you need to help you achieve your wellness goals, including my custom targeted protocols that combine the products I recommend to address specific needs, heart health, immune support, and much more. It's all at drhoffmanstore.com. drhoffmanstore.com.